Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm delighted to say that I've been joined by Shaz Khan, the CEO and co-founder of Vroozi. Shaz, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Andrew. Lovely to be here.
So Shaz has very kindly agreed to take part in our research, which is looking at the way procurement buys software. In particular, we're asking the question, is procurement's buying model of software broken and how it will be impacted in the era of AI? And I know Shaz has got some great insights to share. But before we do that, Shaz, could you just tell our audience a little bit about your own background and how you became to be the founder of Vroozi?
Absolutely, Andrew. So, personal background, I studied computer science and economics at university. Graduated and went on to start at management consulting organization, a large global organization, and happened to stumble upon a big ERP vendor that I decided to specialize in terms of the implementation process across supply chain. I took that experience after a few years and found out that there's a better way to potentially implement the software that's faster, more cost effective, and leads to better results. And so started a series of supply chain consultancies that would focus on that thesis of implementing big box ERP solutions with the speed that I didn't think was seen or realized at that time. And then fast forward to where we are today. We wanted to really look at the market openly. And for me, software has always been a passion area. How software is a game changer, enabler for productivity, for boosting people's behavior in a positive manner. And what we ended up seeing is we saw a really great convergence between the consulting world and also the consumer world with software. And so Vroozi really represents the intersection of one major thesis, which is consumerizing B2B commerce transactions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll explore that more, I'm sure, during the course of our conversation. And I know you've just come back from traveling to see customers in Japan, and so we touched on sort of the cultural differences. And are you seeing similar challenges, or are you solving similar problems, I should perhaps say, for your customers in Asia as you are in the States in particular?
Yeah, I think you see, regardless of the markets you're going into, I think you see the buying patterns, while they might be different in terms of the evaluation stages, the key decision makers that are involved in making a selection. I think the problem sets are typically the same. You have a need to go digital.
Yeah.
You have a need to deliver software and services that are more on-demand, consumable, available and accessible across mobile devices, and a need for transparency in terms of how you actually consume and use the software. And so taking in all those equations, I think those kinds of problem sets are always similar when you're evaluating software across different purchasing economies and countries. What I tend to see is the decision-making process is a lot different.
Right.
So, for example, in the Far East, there is a really big focus on assessing and planning. So, for example, in Japan, companies will take 9 months to assess, plan, and then 3 months to execute the plan.
Right. Okay.
Whereas in some of the Western nations and some of the developing countries, or some of the more industrialized Western countries, you're going to look at a 3-month plan and a 9-month plan to execute. And I've lived and breathed that my entire career.
Yeah.
How many times have we been involved in a selection process that is rather quick, and it takes 2 years to put in the software, right? So I think that you're going to find a happy medium.
Yeah.
We progress, especially with the advent of AI, where you're going to see an equilibrium on planning and execution.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we'll come to the AI in a few moments, but when we met in New York back at DPW in June, we touched on some of the sort of fundamental flaws that we've seen in the general buying process in the Western economies, and one of the things that you highlighted that really got my attention was that so many projects end in a contract signature, but don't actually go live. And I was quite shocked about that. Can you explain to me why that happens, and what does it reveal about the way procurement's buying technology that's causing that particular problem?
To me, it's all around alignment and availability and focus. So oftentimes when you look at a buying cycle, the individuals that you are negotiating with to put in or negotiate contract terms regarding the software are not necessarily the same people that are actually joining the implementation teams and implementing the software. And so there's an absolute disconnect at contract signature. You've done the hard work, negotiated the terms, gone through the legal edits, and now you have a contract in hand. But now there's a fundamental responsibility where I personally believe procurement should still have some level of ownership and oversight over the project that they just signed. And they don't have to be involved actively. They have their full-time duties to serve the needs of the business, but they certainly should have some level of a check-in capability to see how the project is moving along. And oftentimes where I see projects fail, it's not necessarily the lack of stakeholders in a given initiative. It's the right people being involved in terms of oversight to ensure projects that are being signed are actually implemented. And that is a tremendous cost hit. If you go and hire 10 people and 8 of them don't work out, that's a huge hit to the company, financially and also from an opportunity cost, because you've leveraged and put so much energy into finding that talent. You didn't get it right for whatever reason. Same thing with projects and software. You got to have the right stakeholders involved and a level of procurement oversight to ensure that what you've actually bought, you're delivering against it.
That's a really interesting point, actually, and it touched on something which I've shared some frustrations with the market with historically, because I think if you look at some of the elite procurement functions, typically they have somebody whose role is dedicated to that, sort of being the architect of the digital strategy, owning the sort of selection process, and then ultimately owning the associated transformation that comes from the implementation and adoption. And I look at the top procurement functions in Europe in particular, and they've got a really talented, often quite senior person in that sort of role. But the ones that haven't got it, I'll say to a CPO, why don't you have such a person? I'll say, well, it's not a priority for us right now, or we've got other things we need to invest in our resources. And they're often the organisations that have perhaps got flawed implementations or poor adoptions, or in the case that you referred to here, even no implementation or adoption. I think if you spend thousands of dollars on software and you've not got somebody owning that approach, I think that's a gap that a lot of CPOs are missing personally. Have you seen that yourself in the States?
I think 100%. And I think also we have to question what is the evolution of a CPO in terms of their day-to-day responsibilities, not only the CPO, but all the constituents that work under the procurement department. I think if you look at 30 years ago, you would basically work with corporate buyers, strategic commodity managers for their experience in specific spend categories, whether that's IT, peripherals, chemicals. All of these represent different challenges in how you buy these types of spend categories. There has to be some level of experience. Now, when you fast forward to tool sets and the corporate buying process with software, hardware, you have to also have some level of technical acumen. And that we find is still an area for improvement within the CPO and the purchasing office. How do companies train up their departments? How do they become more adept at understanding these different technologies so that when they are implementing them, they're on a semi-equal playing field with the people that are actually doing the software implementation on their behalf?
I often refer to them as the bridge between the actual procurement teams and the internal IT or the SI or whoever it is that's leading the implementation. And when they're missing, when those internal champions are missing, I think that's where you get so many complaints in the marketplace from procurement professionals about poor adoption. But actually, the software vendors sometimes will be brave to point out that perhaps you should look at themselves and the structure of the way they've approached it, really. But Is that because their procurement's too focused on the cost savings rather than the actual results of the software? Is that a fair criticism?
I think there's definitely room to look at incentive models within the procurement office. And oftentimes we see, well, a salesperson will go and get commissioned quite heavily against selling a net new deal to a customer versus a procurement department, which is generating tremendous cost savings.
Yeah.
I don't think those are the same things. I think when you have sales, you're generating revenue. It's quite honestly a little bit harder to do to generate a net new sale. And so there should be some level of incentive associated to that might be and look and feel bigger than what a procurement department's doing. However, I think procurement departments, they're affecting operating margins ultimately. And so when you look at it from that perspective, if you're positively impacting operating margins as an organization, how can you look at the incentive plan for procurement organizations, not just on the cost saving standpoint, but here's a metric. How about, are people using the software that was selected? Or is it just shelfware?
Yeah.
What benefit is there if you've negotiated the terms on a contract that never sees the light of day in terms of usage? And so again, there should be some level of focus, not only in negotiating great terms, generating cost savings for the business, but also letting projects see their way through successfully with high end user adoption, productivity, and a demonstrable proof for better operating margins.
Yeah. And I think, as we look at new pricing models like value-based pricing and impact, then that might be something which is thought about more, and maybe procurement people might start to get incentivized by that. But as an aside, I was at DPW Amsterdam. When you were in Japan, I was in Amsterdam at DPW, and one procurement leader privately confessed to me their adoption rate on one of their tools was 7% across their procurement team. So not quite the impact they're looking for with that particular investment. So, obviously you're selling software for the use of procurement and finance teams predominantly, I would suggest. And so if you look at the best buying processes, and not just the ones you win, Shaz, but the best buying processes, what are the key things that procurement teams need to get right from the very start of the buying process to avoid wasted time, to avoid shelfware, and to avoid the sort of outcomes we've just been speaking about?
I think the best buying processes we've seen is the educated buyer. And so what I mean by the educated buyer is the individual or groups that have clearly identified the problem that they're looking to solve, have clearly done some upfront research about how they would like to solve the problem, and have now identified 3 areas of the solution set that are must-haves.
Yeah.
I think that if you look at the traditional buying process when it comes to procurement, you have these very complex RFPs. You have a bunch of binary outputs in terms of yes or no questions with additional context. That is just static information that you're not really seeing, in terms of live software. And then you go downstream into the buying process if you're shortlisted and you go into a 1.5 hour to 3 hour demo. Can you really extract if this company can solve your problem in that time frame? Can you really extract based on a ChatGPT query that this is a shortlist candidate?
Yeah.
Right. And so the buyers today are skewing younger. They are more influenced by video, social use cases, their own research, which is really present on the internet, and analyst firms. And they are already educated, very educated on your company and your abilities before they even engage with you.
Yeah.
Those buyers we find to be really great to work with in the process, even if we do not win the deal, because we know they have a very clear vision.
Yeah.
But also there has to be some level of humility so that you can also embrace and learn from the vendor on things that might not be readily apparent on their one sheets or their website. and that can help you influence. So being a little bit more malleable in your evaluation process also we find to be part of that hyper-educated buyer.
Yeah, yeah. That's making me think about another conversation I had in this series with a CRO of one of the really big established S2P vendors. And they talked about, I said, what were the signs of a process that you think, whether you win or lose, is going to be a good process? And this particular CRO talked about the engagement before the start of the RFX process in terms of their willingness to have conversations with the vendors about the problems looking to solve, about the capabilities. And so they had a sense really early on whether actually this was one they could win or not, and they should invest their time. And of course, it's the cost of sale and indeed the cost of purchase is huge on both sides. But that really made me think about the willingness to engage before the process actually starts. This hyper-educated buyer you're talking about, do you think they're more managed to have those sorts of conversations up front, or have they done their homework and they're perhaps less likely to engage in that regard?
Well, overwhelmingly, I think that we see because of the purchasing department skewing now younger, more millennials, Gen Z, they are doing a lot of research on their own. Again, you had to pick up a phone, talk to the buyer, understand supply chain, understand inventory, understand production capacity. I don't think those things change. You still have to have those conversations because those aren't going to be readily apparent when you're making a buying decision. However, when you look at how people are educating themselves on software, where you can actually see the results on screen, you can go through guided video tours, you can see customer testimonials, you can reach out to analysts independently. I think all of those factor in very positively so that customers can actually get really good information before they engage in a dialogue.
Yeah. That sounds like sort of a great checklist, if you will, for a tech buyer to start with in terms of what they should be doing in order to really evaluate the marketplace, and of course alongside all the internal discussions with stakeholders and the creation of all the sort of RFX process. So that'd be a sort of good checklist really for a procurement leader. Would you suggest that, Shaz, in terms of how to get started?
I would say the identification process of vendors to solve specific problem sets and the time it takes to research has drastically been reduced. Based on the plethora of information that is available, plus the combination of GPT engines, can actually allow people that might not be educated on a problem set to actually go through a set of prompt exercises to get through a short list. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the end all be all. Going through ChatGPT and cutting your sourcing process down from 3 months to 3 minutes. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But it's certainly a good head start. It's certainly a good head start for companies to at least start looking at the landscape, and then including some other players that might not be still readily available in those types of engines and evaluation criteria. So it's a brave new world. I think sourcing decisions are going to become easier in the sense of identifying the people that need to solve specific problem sets. But the evaluation process needs to be improved.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on AI. We've been talking for 20 minutes. We've got to dig into it now, Shaz. It wouldn't be we'd be off the mark if we didn't really talk about AI in some depth. So, look, I was at DPW, as I've mentioned on more than one occasion, and we had the AI natives. We had the traditional, if that's the right word, SaaS vendors who are bringing in AI capabilities. Everyone's got some AI capability. I heard the phrase snake oil used a few times from some people about whether AI is genuine or not in some of these organisations, because some vendors are overselling or perhaps mislabeling what they do. What advice would you give to procurement teams to cut through the hype and test whether a solution really has some AI value?
When you look at AI, you must engage in some level of a pilot. Number one, and to even get to a pilot, you have to first go through some level, or if you have not already, form an internal committee as it relates to AI, and those committees should be really focused on legal requirements, risk tolerance, governance of these types of AI models, the level and degree of autonomy by which you want some of these AI models to make decisions or not. Because ultimately, if you're putting in or implementing some level of AI in a company, regardless of how innocuous you think it is, it needs oversight, it needs governance, and there's a whole new set of strategies associated with looking at those. And AI for us, really is a assistant. It's an enabler. It's an incredible productivity booster when implemented correctly. When you talk about the ability to process thousands of documents simultaneously, extracting, inferring, understanding from those documents to assist with data processing, as an example, regardless of the use case, AI is doing incredibly well. However, it needs to be trained. It needs to understand your business, your industry, your people. And for that, it takes time. It's not just going to be something you just turn on. And I think a lot of the marketing that we see today is, we have AI, you're good.
Yeah.
Right. That is as far from the truth as possible. Right. There's too much hype around what we call out of the box AI, which I have a problem with.
Right.
Because for something to be out of the box, it's really got to have some level of meaningful training associated to your business and industry.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a knowledge gap on both sides, isn't there? Not just the practitioners who are obviously procurement professionals, but also the salespeople, really, about, what is true AI and how it can be deployed. I mean, are you concerned that knowledge gap might affect the way technology is going to be bought, and it might actually damage the perception of AI in the practitioner's eyes?
I'm concerned in two ways. The first way is that, let's take from a software vendor perspective. I'm concerned that the individuals implementing the software that are so-called product experts on AI don't really understand the basic tenets of AI.
Right.
They cannot actually define what an agentic AI process is versus deploying a set of agents or a library of agents.
Right.
Two distinct processes. And I've had many conversations with many different software vendors that really still struggle with articulating differentiation patterns around their implementation and usage of AI. That is a huge red flag. If the people that are implementing the software cannot actually explain what they're doing with AI, then how can you expect the customer to understand what is happening with the AI in that vendor's ecosystem? So I think that's one major concern area. The second is, and I'll just say, with what's happening in the solutions consulting world and big box system integrators, are these individuals and groups really understanding what they're putting in? Or are we going to be left with the same types of models where you have inexperienced professionals going in, taking software, getting trained up for 2 months and already become AI certified experts? Impossible. Yeah. I mean, that's a devotion. It's time, it's energy. And so this whole upskilling, it's not just taking a online course for 30 minutes and a beginner's tutorial in AI and say, I'm ready to go. Yeah. There has to be far more discipline and structure and curriculum to upskill and up talent individuals across the spectrum, whether you're a software vendor, an SI, or the customer itself.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for the actual vendors, actually having that capability in your team is going to be as important as how good the product actually is, because it goes back to the adoption point, doesn't it? And if you're not got the right people, doing integration, then you're not going to realize the true value. So however good your product is, if it's not deployed in the correct fashion, then you're going to have problems. And then the point you make about the practitioners, this is this new business that that I'm launching, agentic procurement, is about really equipping people with the knowledge of what AI truly can and can't do in procurement. And a lot of what we do is bringing people like yourself and other founders who understand it into the conversation. Because I've got a working knowledge of how to use it, but I don't know how to build it. So we're bringing in experts in that to help educate the marketplace, because not everyone can get to all the big events, not everyone can see the presentations. And even then, at DPW, I probably sat through 10 presentations, and they weren't all, well, some were contradictory of others about what actually could and couldn't be done. So it's quite a confusing landscape, I think, for the procurement professional, particularly the non-technically minded one. But so I think you've got a big education piece on both sides of the fence, really. But getting back to the buying cycles, now salespeople have got AI, procurement professionals have got AI capabilities. You're buying tools that have got AI at the heart. You look at the classic sort of sales cycle in procurement can be 9 months plus. The technology might be unrecognisable in that 9 months period of time from when you start approach to end. How do procurement professionals avoid buying tools that are obsolete or out of date? What's the landscape look like there in terms of the actual buying process, Shaz?
Well, the old adage, Andrew, is what you buy today is legacy tomorrow.
Right.
And ultimately, there's no truer words that have been spoken with the advent of AI. The pace by which new models, technology is being released, it's impossible to keep up.
Yeah.
Where I think there's levels where companies can focus on the improvement is the evaluation selection criteria must be compressed.
Right.
You cannot go on to 12-month cycles, because imagine the innovation curve within 12 months. What you're evaluating at the start of your business problem, well, there's completely new solution sets at the tail end of that evaluation process that you'd not even considered because you've invested 12 months of evaluation process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on the implementation process, tools must be as a service.
Yeah.
Buyers are moving from the ownership model to an as a service model, moving away from heavy CapEx investments to more transparent, repeatable, predictable OpEx investments. But more importantly, those have to be quick.
Yeah.
Those cannot be also 12-month implementation cycles. And what that takes is a little bit of an ego check at the door.
Yeah.
If your business process suggests that you've been doing X for 30 years, it's not broken and it's going to be the same way, and I want my software to basically morph into that process, then we would kindly ask, reconsider your 30-year-old process to something a little bit more flexible, streamlined, and featherweight and agile.
Yeah.
Right. And that to me is where the rubber hits the road. How can you improve evaluation cycles such that you can get into a better buying habit and process? And how can you improve that implementation experience end to end so you're not involved in these 12-month cycles? It has to be a little bit of give and take.
Yeah. Yeah. And in very simple terms, if your evaluation and your negotiation process is taking so long, there's a cost to that on both sides of the fence. If you streamline that and improve the pace of it, then there's a saving there inherently because of your cost of negotiation or your cost of acquisition, your cost of sale for the software. There's a win-win there if we just start to move these things forward a lot more quickly. And that was a concept that was at the very, very heart of this research, really. That and the change in the sort of the cost modeling. So historically, and tell me how you do it yourself, Shaz, but a lot of software has been on a per seat model, and that feels like it's dating pretty quickly, and we're moving now to usage based or outcome based or complexity or value. How do you see that landscape, Shaz?
Well, I think that's an interesting model. I think for us, Vroozi, we kind of pioneered in the procurement space back in 2012, a subscription base when nobody was really talking about subscription pricing. I don't think that will change. There's a cost of goods to deliver enterprise grade software to the market. However, I do see hybrid pricing models, and they're fascinating to me. When you look at a software vendor, you're looking at multiple modes of costs for that software vendor. Obviously, you have labor. You have infrastructure costs with hyper cloud computing providers. You have the compute power itself. Now with AI, you have the advent of tokenization. So all of these elements are contributing to costs. Now, how do you translate those costs with some healthy margins to a win-win for a customer?
Yeah.
And so you can now look at usage-based capabilities, right? You've used X amount of the compute power and tokens for this month, and those are coming at X cost to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, does that provide predictability? No. You could be going up and down, but you have to have a base floor. Yeah. At least you know that you're going to be spending X amount of dollars per month or per year as a base, and you can see variability on top of that. And so I think when you look at kind of a scheme of the pricing models, you have a base platform fee that stays fixed, And then you have different models on top of that, where it could be variable based on outcomes, usage, or other criteria.
It seems to me that the software companies are moving quickly in that, and the procurement teams are. Is that fair, or I'm being too critical of the procurement teams there?
We're seeing conversations skewed towards that. I would say that I think the vendors are definitely moving towards that. I cannot speak on the ability for these procurement organizations to adopt this pricing, because I'll just say, like, outcome-based pricing. Whenever you say outcome-based pricing, you have to have basically some level of foundational goal. Okay, what is my outcome being measured against? And oftentimes when we go to, well, tell me your cost per invoice today. Tell me your cost per purchase order. You know what we get? Crickets. So a lot of companies don't even have the foundational costs of what they're supporting from a business process standpoint, which becomes very subjective when you look at outcome, because there's no definitive baseline.
Yeah.
Right. So I think those areas, now usage based, that's easy, right? You can generate a report and say use X amount of software based on compute power over this month or this time period, and here's our cost for you for that usage.
Yeah. But either way, whichever route you go down, there's quite a shift in mindset required for the procurement teams to really embrace this. But longer term, you would think once they get used to it, it's actually better value on both sides. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to look at a win-win. And I think procurement departments are not looking at, and vendors for that, like, are not looking at, hey, we want to be implemented for a year. And then, I mean, it's got to be a true, transparent, friendly, innovative partnership. And so when you look at selection criteria, you want to enjoy the teams that you work with, number one. You want to have transparency in terms of what you're putting out to the market, in terms of product, what's real, what's not, what's on the roadmap. And more importantly, you got to be in it for the long haul. This is not something where you want to implement software and then cut ties, because replacing is not easy to do and it's expensive. However, if you get to that choice because you see a gap in progress and innovation on both sides or on one side, then you have to go back out to market.
Yeah. Fascinating. Shaz, you've shared some really interesting insights there, which I'm sure our procurement audience will find particularly interesting, because there's the sort of different angles you've approached that, not only the buying process, but also the cost modeling conversation there towards the end. If people are interested in exploring this about how you're doing things at Vroozi, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, you can definitely hit me up on email at shaz.khan@vroozi.com. I always try to be a good steward and respond to any type of inbound inquiries. And you can check us out at vroozi.com for more information.
Yeah, indeed. And have you got any big events left for the rest of this year that you're attending at the conferences that you're going to at all?
Yes, so we'll be attending one of our partner conferences in Houston at the end of this month in October. And then we'll be attending another partner conference, speaking at that conference in Denver at the Deltec ProjectCon show. So we're very excited about those and excited for 2026.
Yep, indeed. I think it's going to be a fascinating market next year with the evolution of the tech and the different thinking from procurement teams and the education they need to embark on for AI. So many different sort of layers to it, but fascinating time, which is how we like it. Keeps it interesting, of course. So thank you everyone for taking the time to watch this. I hope you found those insights from Shaz really helpful. Whichever side of the Atlantic or indeed out in Asia Pac, where I know he's been busy with his customers recently, please do get in touch to talk about what Vroozi can do for your organisation. For me, thank you for taking time to watch it. I hope you found it insightful. And if you want to talk about anything around the skills or the mindsets required to embrace this new era of AI, then of course we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.